My brother knocked up my girlfriend, she got pregnant, my parents kicked me out and gave them my trust fund, then Jason had always been the overlooked son, while his younger brother, Ryan, was the undisputed golden child of the family. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a deeply ingrained imbalance that defined Jason's entire existence. No matter what Jason did, it was never enough. Meanwhile, Ryan's every minor achievement was met with applause, as if he had conquered the world. Jason was the kind of kid who never needed to be told twice to do his homework. He got straight A's in school, pouring himself into his studies, determined to make something of himself. He stayed up late, not because he was procrastinating, but because he was pushing himself to be the best. And when he brought home his report card, filled with perfect grades, his parents barely looked at it. Instead, they asked him, "Why didn't you do the extra credit assignments?" As if excellence was expected, but never celebrated. Ryan, on the other hand, scraped by with average grades, and yet, the family would rally around him whenever he so much as passed a test. When he managed AB in one of his classes, their mother beamed with pride, reassuring Ryan that he was so smart and just had to apply himself. The disparity was infuriating. Jason worked twice as hard and received none of the recognition, while Ryan, who barely put in effort, was constantly told how amazing he was. The differences in treatment weren't just academic. When Jason got into a highly competitive university, one that he had worked for years to earn a spot in, he expected, just once, for his parents to be proud of him. Instead, at dinner that night, they spent the entire meal consoling Ryan, who was failing his classes and struggling to keep up. Not a single congratulatory word for Jason, not even a pat on the back. Just whispers of how they had to support Ryan through his academic struggles, as if Jason's success was an inconvenience rather than something to be celebrated. That was just how things were. Ryan's junior varsity baseball participation certificate had been pinned to the fridge for 3 years. 3 years. Meanwhile, when Jason received his acceptance letter to his dream school, it lasted all of 2 days before disappearing. No one mentioned it. No one acted like it was a big deal. It was as if Jason's achievements were ghosts, present, but invisible. Jason buried the resentment deep down, trying to tell himself it didn't matter. But it did. It burned inside him, eating away at him every time he saw Ryan getting praised for doing the bare minimum. Every time he watched his parents beam with pride at something laughably mediocre while he stood on the sidelines, unnoticed. Feeling unappreciated, Jason made a decision that changed his life forever. He joined the military. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. He had been considering it for a while, but the realization that nothing he did would ever be enough for his family pushed him over the edge. He wanted to prove, if not to them, then at least to himself, that he was worth something. That he mattered. He enlisted as a combat medic, knowing full well the dangers that came with the job. But in a twisted way, that was part of the appeal. Maybe if he did something extreme, something undeniably valuable, his family would finally see him. Maybe they would finally acknowledge his worth. Afghanistan was brutal. Jason saw things no one should ever have to see. He held dying soldiers in his arms, whispering reassurances even when he knew they wouldn't make it. He ran through gunfire to save lives, ignoring his own safety because that was his job. And for the first time, he felt like he mattered. His fellow soldiers relied on him. He wasn't invisible. He was needed. But war doesn't leave you unscathed. Jason came back home with a busted knee, an injury that would never fully heal. It ached with every step, a permanent reminder of what he had been through. But worse than the physical pain was the mental toll. The nightmares, the flashbacks, things his family could never understand. And yet, when he returned, nothing had changed. His family welcomed him back with all the enthusiasm of someone greeting a distant cousin at a family reunion. There were no heartfelt thank yous, no real acknowledgement of what he had endured. Instead, they acted as if he had just been away on some extended trip, like he had taken a long vacation rather than survived a war. Ryan, of course, was still the center of attention. He had dropped out of college by then, bouncing between jobs, still failing at life but somehow still the golden child. Their mother fussed over him constantly, worried about his future, while Jason, the war veteran, the survivor, the one who had actually accomplished something, was barely acknowledged. Even when Jason tried to talk about his experiences, their father would quickly change the subject. "Let's not bring that up at dinner," he would say, as if Jason's trauma was an inconvenience. And that was when Jason realized the truth. It didn't matter what he did. It didn't matter if he saved lives, if he suffered, if he bled for something greater than himself. To them, he would always be second place. Ryan would always be the favorite, no matter how much he failed. Jason had given everything, his time, his effort, even his body, to prove his worth. But in the end, the only people who truly saw him were the ones he had fought alongside. His family never would. And that hurt more than anything the war had ever thrown at him. Jason came back from the war broken but determined. He had spent years fighting for something greater than himself, and yet, when he returned home, it was as if he had never left. His parents barely acknowledged his sacrifices, and Ryan, the eternal golden child, was still the center of their world, despite having achieved nothing. Jason knew he couldn't change them, so he focused on changing himself. He had seen firsthand how difficult it was for veterans to transition back into civilian life, and he wanted to help. That's why he enrolled in business school, determined to open a veteran-focused gym where people like him could rebuild their strength, both physically and mentally. It was during his studies that he met Mia, a bright and compassionate physical therapy student. She was everything Jason thought he needed: kind, supportive, and always ready to listen. When he talked about his nightmares and the weight of his past, she didn't look away. She stayed. And for the first time in years, Jason felt like he wasn't completely alone. They fell for each other fast, and within a few months, they moved in together. But if there was one thing Jason had learned in life, it was that nothing good lasted forever. Ryan, as always, found a way to insert himself into Jason's happiness. At first, it was subtle, harmless, even. He was overly friendly with Mia, always cracking jokes and finding reasons to touch her arm or brush a strand of hair from her face. Jason noticed it but told himself he was overthinking. Ryan had always been the kind of guy who coasted through life on charm, and maybe this was just another example of him trying too hard. Then it got worse. Ryan started showing up unannounced at their apartment, always when Jason wasn't home. Mia would laugh it off, saying he had just stopped by or needed help with something. But it never sat right with Jason. Why was Ryan suddenly so interested in his life when he had never cared before? He started noticing little things: Mia being distant, always having an excuse when Jason tried to be affectionate, always looking exhausted but never explaining why. The tension built for months, gnawing at Jason like an open wound. He wanted to trust Mia, wanted to believe she would never betray him, but doubt whispered in the back of his mind, growing louder with each passing day. Then, one night, everything fell apart. Jason had planned the evening perfectly. He had finished his classes early, stopped by their favorite Thai restaurant, and picked up takeout. In his pocket was a small, velvet box, the engagement ring he had been holding onto for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Tonight was supposed to be that moment. But when he stepped into the apartment, the smell of food was drowned out by something else: laughter. Not just any laughter. Ryan's laughter. Jason's stomach dropped. He moved quietly, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear his own footsteps. And then he saw them. Ryan and Mia, curled up together on the couch, her legs draped over his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. The sight made Jason's vision blur with rage. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease of it, the way they looked so comfortable together, as if this had been happening for a long time. As if he was the outsider in his own home. For a moment, they didn't notice him. Ryan was whispering something in Mia's ear, and she was smiling, leaning into him. Then Jason stepped forward, and the air shifted. Mia's eyes widened in shock, and she scrambled to sit up, her face turning pale. Ryan, however, didn't move. He didn't even look guilty. He just smirked and said, "Bro, calm down. Calm down." Jason saw red. The betrayal, the years of being ignored, the humiliation of always coming second, it all boiled over. He lunged at Ryan, his hands wrapping around his brother's throat before he even realized what he was doing. Ryan's smirk vanished as he choked, his hands clawing at Jason's grip. Mia screamed, grabbing at Jason's arms, but he barely felt it. All he could see was Ryan's smug, arrogant face, the same face that had always gotten away with everything. Not this time. It took everything in Jason to let go before he did something he couldn't take back. Ryan gasped for air, coughing, while Mia stood frozen, tears brimming in her eyes. Jason didn't care. "Get out," he snarled. "Both of you." Mia hesitated. "Jason, I..." "Now." Ryan, still rubbing his throat, let out a short laugh. "Damn man. Overreacting much?" Jason grabbed him by the collar and shoved him toward the door. "You don't get to talk." Mia finally snapped out of her daze and hurried after Ryan. As she reached the doorway, she turned back, her voice barely above a whisper. "It just happened." Jason let out a bitter laugh. 8 months of lying isn't just happening. Get out. And with that, he slammed the door behind them. For the first time in his life, Jason wasn't the one being cast aside. He was the one doing the leaving. And as much as it hurt, it felt damn good. Jason spent the first few weeks after the betrayal in a haze of anger and disbelief. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, Ryan and Mia, laughing together, curled up on the couch in what had once been his home. The home he had built with the woman he thought he would marry. His brother had taken everything from him, and yet, somehow, it still felt like Ryan had won. But Jason had learned how to endure pain. He had survived war, abandonment, and a lifetime of being overlooked. This wouldn't break him. He threw himself into his work, pushing forward, determined to build the veteran-focused gym he had always dreamed of. It was the only thing that kept him grounded. Then, 3 weeks after the betrayal, the final blow came. Jason had always known his grandmother was the only member of his family who truly saw him. She was the one person who had never treated him like an afterthought. Before she passed, she had set aside a trust fund for him. $140,000 meant to help him start his life. He had never touched it, wanting to use it for something meaningful. It was supposed to be his foundation, his chance to build something of his own. But when he went to check the account, the balance was gone. At first, he thought it had to be a mistake. He called the bank, his hands shaking as he listened to the automated messages before finally reaching a representative. Then came the answer that made his blood run cold. The money had been withdrawn. Legally. His parents had found a loophole, a technicality that allowed them to access the funds. His own family had stolen from him. Jason saw red. The next thing he knew, he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, speeding toward his parents' house. The betrayal had been bad enough, but this was unforgivable. He didn't bother knocking. He stormed through the front door, his heart pounding in his ears, ready to demand answers. And then he saw them. His parents, Ryan, Mia. A celebration. Balloons. A banner. Champagne glasses clinking together. Laughter. It took him a second to register the words on the cheap, decorative sign hanging on the wall. Congratulations, Ryan and Mia. Jason's stomach twisted. Mia was smiling, her hand resting on her stomach. His mother beamed beside her. Ryan, standing tall, had his usual smug grin plastered on his face, looking as though he had won a prize. Jason's voice was deadly calm, but his body shook with barely contained rage. Tell me you didn't. The laughter died instantly. His father stiffened. His mother let out an exasperated sigh, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. Ryan just smirked. Oh hey, bro, didn't expect to see you here. Jason ignored him and turned to his parent. You stole my money for them? His voice was low, but the fury behind it was undeniable. His mother pursed her lips, then folded her arms. Watch your tone, Jason. Watch my... He let out a bitter laugh. You drained my trust fund. The money Grandma left me. And for what? For them. He gestured at Ryan and Mia, who had the audacity to look unbothered, as if they weren't the reason his world had come crashing down. His father finally spoke, voice flat. It was for a good cause. Jason felt something inside him snap. A good cause. His mother sighed, shaking her head. Jason, you don't understand. Ryan and Mia are starting a family. They needed help. Jason barely heard her. He was too busy piecing things together, his eyes darting to Mia's stomach. It was subtle, but now that he knew what to look for. 3 months. His breath caught. His vision blurred. 3 months. Mia had been sleeping with both of them when she got pregnant. He turned to her, his voice sharp as a blade. Is it mine? Mia looked down, guilt flashing across her face for the first time that night. But Ryan? Ryan laughed. Nah, man, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. We both know she was already mine by then. Jason lunged, but his father stepped between them, pushing him back. Enough. Jason's fists clenched. His pulse roared in his ears. You used my money to buy them a house, didn't you? His mother exhaled, as if she were exhausted by his behavior. Yes, they needed a home for the baby. Jason shook his head in disbelief. And you didn't think I needed it? That maybe I had plans for that money? That it was mine. His mother's face hardened. Ryan and Mia are in love. You should be happy for them. Then, before Jason could react, she slapped him. The sharp sting barely registered. What hurt more was the message behind it. He had fought for this country. He had nearly died more times than he could count. He had given everything to be a good son, a good man. And this was his reward. Jason took a step back, his breathing ragged. He looked at each of them, his father, who stood there without a shred of remorse. His mother, whose disappointment in him was somehow stronger than the betrayal they had all committed. Ryan, who basked in the victory like he had won some kind of twisted competition. And Mia, the woman he had loved. The woman who had thrown him away for the brother who had taken everything from him. He felt nothing but disgust. Slowly, Jason straightened. His voice was quieter this time, but there was no mistaking the finality in his tone. "We're done." His mother's face twisted. "Jason, don't be ridiculous." "No," he cut her off. "You've made your choice. And I'm making mine." Ryan scoffed. "Bro, stop being dramatic." Jason turned to him, a humorless smile on his lips. "I'm not your brother anymore." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The night air hit him like a wave, but he didn't stop moving. He got into his truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He would never step foot in that house again. He had survived Afghanistan. He would survive this. And one day, when Ryan and Mia's perfect little life crumbled, when his parents finally realized what they had lost, Jason wouldn't be there to see it. Jason left his hometown that night and never looked back. He drove until the city lights faded into nothingness, until the road stretched on in front of him like an open wound, endless and empty. His family was dead to him. The betrayal had burned away any lingering attachment, leaving only raw determination in its place. A week later, he dropped out of business school. The dream of opening a gym had been tied to a past he no longer wanted. The money meant to fund it was gone, stolen to build a life for the people who had ruined his. He refused to waste another second mourning what had been taken from him. Instead, he re-enlisted in the military. Afghanistan had left scars on his body and his mind, but it had also given him something he had never found at home: purpose. The battlefield didn't play favorites. No golden children, no overlooked sons. Just men fighting to survive, relying on each other. There was no Ryan, no betrayal, no smug smirks. Just the mission. And that was enough. For the next 4 years, Jason buried himself in the military. He pushed his body beyond its limits, excelling in every field assignment. He climbed the ranks, earned the respect of his unit, and proved, if only to himself, that he was worth something. But even war couldn't last forever. When his service ended, Jason faced a choice: drift aimlessly or rebuild himself on his own terms. He chose the latter. He used the GI Bill to go back to school, this time with clear intent. He earned a business degree, then a master's in health administration. Every class, every lecture, every sleepless night was a step away from his past and toward the future he was carving for himself. That's when he met Marcus. Marcus had been a logistics officer, a man with the kind of sharp, strategic mind that could turn chaos into order. They had crossed paths in the service, but it wasn't until they were both out that they truly connected. Over coffee one afternoon, Marcus spoke about the struggles veterans faced after leaving the military: injuries, PTSD, the loss of identity. Jason listened, then said, "Let's fix that." And so they did. Together, they co-founded a veteran wellness center, a place designed not just for physical recovery but for mental and emotional healing. They combined their skills. Jason handled operations and health services, while Marcus managed logistics and expansion. They started small, one center in a modest building with a few rooms for therapy and rehabilitation. Then, almost overnight, it took off. The need was greater than they had imagined. Veterans from all over the state came for treatment, support, and a sense of belonging. Word spread. Within 3 years, they had expanded to 4 locations. Each center became more than just a business. It was a sanctuary for those who had been forgotten after serving their country. For the first time in his life, Jason wasn't fighting for recognition. He didn't need his family's approval. He had built something real, something that mattered, and he had done it without them. Then, when he least expected it, he met Sarah. She wasn't part of the military world. She was a trauma psychologist who worked with veterans. Smart, steady, and unshaken by the weight of the past, she challenged Jason in ways he hadn't realized he needed. With her, there were no games, no betrayals, no quiet doubts gnawing at the back of his mind. She didn't make him feel like an afterthought. For the first time, Jason built a relationship on trust, not survival. Within a year, they were engaged. They bought a home together, a place that belonged to them, bought with his money, his hard work. No stolen trust funds, no handouts, no family ties. Jason never checked up on his parents, never looked at Ryan's social media, never wondered what had become of Mia and the baby she had carried. As far as he was concerned, they had ceased to exist the moment they betrayed him, and he had never been happier. Years passed, and Jason never once thought about his family. He had buried them in the past, along with every painful memory they had carved into him. He had built something real, his life, his success, his happiness, without them. The veteran wellness centers were thriving, expanding beyond what he had ever dreamed. He and Sarah were married now, partners in every sense of the word. Their home was warm, filled with love, built on trust. Jason was no longer the overlooked son. He was no longer the boy begging for scraps of approval. He had won, and he had done it without them. Then, one evening, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. At first, he considered ignoring it, but something in his gut told him to answer. He swiped the screen and brought the phone to his ear. A voice he hadn't heard in years trembled on the other end. "Jason, it's Mom." He said nothing. "Please," she continued, her voice thick with something she had never directed at him before, desperation. "We need your help." Jason didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He just listened. And then, like a dam breaking, it all poured out. His father had lost his job a year ago. He had been too proud to take lower-paying work, assuming something better would come along. It never did. His mother had tried to keep things afloat, but money had run dry. Then there was Ryan. Jason's grip on the phone tightened as she explained how Ryan had torn his rotator cuff and, during recovery, had become addicted to painkillers. He had spiraled, couldn't hold a job, barely functioned. And Mia, had been forced to quit her job to take care of their 3 kids. The same woman who had betrayed Jason, who had carried a child while sleeping with both brothers, was now drowning under the weight of the life she had chosen. And the house bought with Jason's stolen money, was being foreclosed. His mother's voice cracked. "Jason, we're about to lose everything." Jason let that hang in the air. Then she played her final card. The same one she had always played when she needed to manipulate him. "We're family," she pleaded. "Ryan's kids don't deserve to suffer for this." Family. That word used to wound him. Not anymore. He let out a slow, steady breath and finally spoke, his voice as cold as steel. "You made your choices. Now live with them." His mother gasped like he had struck her. "Jason, please. I know we made mistakes, but you have so much. Helping us wouldn't even hurt you." Jason laughed. The sound was bitter, sharp, the kind of laughter that carried years of resentment behind it. "You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about how you drained my trust fund. How you stole my future to hand it to Ryan like it was nothing." His mother stammered. "We thought we were doing what was best." "For who?" Jason cut her off, his voice sharp enough to slice through the years of lies. "It sure as hell wasn't best for me. But you didn't care, did you? Because Ryan always came first. Even when he took my home. Even when he took my fiancée. Even when he stole from me and you helped him do it." There was silence. Then, softly, his mother whispered, "We didn't think you'd turn out like this." Jason smiled. "Neither did I." Then he hung up. He blocked the number. He didn't lose sleep that night. His family had never saved him. And now they couldn't save themselves. 6 months passed. Jason never checked in, never wondered what had happened to them. But the news still found him, trickling in like an echo from a life he had left behind. The house, the one bought with his stolen money, was gone. Foreclosed. The family that had thrown him away had been thrown out themselves. His parents, drowning in debt, had been forced to file for bankruptcy. Ryan and Mia had lost everything. No savings. No fallback. Just an endless pit of failure they had dug themselves into. They moved in with her parents, a humiliating collapse for a man who had spent his life coasting on luck and handouts. Jason felt nothing. No guilt. No regret. No hesitation. For years, they had made him feel like he was nothing without them. Like he was supposed to be grateful for their scraps, their dismissive approval. But now they were the ones who needed him. And he didn't need them. Jason sat on the balcony of his home, the city lights stretching out before him. A house bought with his money. Built on his hard work. Beside him, Sarah sat with a glass of wine, her presence steady, unwavering. He had won. Not through petty revenge. Not through anger. Through success. And that was the only victory that mattered. 6 months passed. Jason never checked in, never wondered what had happened to them. But the news still found him, trickling in like an echo from a life he had left behind. The house, the one bought with his stolen money, was gone. Foreclosed. The family that had thrown him away had been thrown out themselves. His parents, drowning in debt, had been forced to file for bankruptcy. Ryan and Mia had lost everything. No savings. No fallback. Just an endless pit of failure they had dug themselves into. They moved in with her parents, a humiliating collapse for a man who had spent his life coasting on luck and handouts. Jason felt nothing. No guilt. No regret. No hesitation. For years, they had made him feel like he was nothing without them. Like he was supposed to be grateful for their scraps, their dismissive approval. But now? Now they were the ones who needed him. And he didn't need them. Jason sat on the balcony of his home, the city lights stretching out before him. A house bought with his money. Built on his hard work. Beside him, Sarah sat with a glass of wine, her presence steady, unwavering. He had won. Not through petty revenge. Not through anger. Through success. And that was the only victory that mattered.